Hello, welcome back to our YouTube channel. Today we are going to do a Unit 1 AP Comp Sci Principles review, and I'm just going to be going through the basic vocab, and let's get started. So first, it is the topic 1.1, which talks about the iterative development process. And that is basically a cycle of computer programs which design, develop, and test. As you can see in the image, that is the cycle and it's repetitive and uses iteration. Iteration is basically a synonym for repetition. Computational iteration, in the other hand, is when a company uses iteration. So, for example, Apple updates. Debugging is to fix code errors. Next, we have 1.2, which is about algorithms. An algorithm is a finite set of instructions that accomplish specific tasks. Sequencing is executing statements in order, one at a time. Ambiguous means to have a double meaning. Selection uses if then to select or execute a step. Imperative, a statement, means to command statement with verb. Example, move forward. A descriptive qualifier is a specific adverb that further limits the meaning of a verb. For example, instead of saying shoe, left shoe. Next, we have 1.3, which is all about languages. The natural language is easy for humans but difficult for computers. It is ambiguous, meaning having a double meaning. High level programming is like Scratch. It's easy for humans and computers. It is not ambiguous. Low level programming has two types and they're both not ambiguous. The first type is assembly. It's when trained humans can read it and it is pretty easy when you are able to understand it. Machine, on the other hand, is difficult for a human, but easy for the computer. An example is binary. Binary uses zeros and ones to code. Compilation is to source code translated, and compilation is source code translated to machine code. Abstraction is to hide details for non-complexity and it's basically hiding unnecessary details. Next, we have 1.4, and 1.4 is the idea to execution. So, an input is a user instruction that is then transformed into binary. Memory, also called RAM, is memory storage, it's where the code is stored. And output is the display of the result. A CPU, also called Central Processing Unit, is a processor that calculates info. A bit is a one binary digit, so 0 or 1. Source code is programs written in high level languages, and machine code is programs written in machine level instructions or low level languages that is then read by computers. So, binary is an example of this. And again, compilation is source code translated to machine code. Next, we have 1.5 and 1.6, and it is all about Scratch. There are multiple blocks and colors. So if you go to Scratch and explore, you will know more about these, but these are just the basic vocab. So Scratch is a visual programming language, which is a drag and drop rather than text coding. An event is blocks of code that trigger behavior. For example, when we click the green flag, the code starts in Scratch. Broadcast is blocks of codes executed at a given time by computing a message. And a code statement is a program code which expresses an action. 1.7 is user input and storage. A state or an attribute is a description of what computer or variable is doing right now. A placeholder is a variable for a certain value. And for 1.8, it's defining variables. And we have many different variable types. And so an integer, it stores only integers or whole numbers. No decimals are allowed in this. A character stores single characters. So a letter or a symbol can also be stored in this. A string is a string of characters, and you can think of it as a sentence. It can be any length and it can use as many characters. A Boolean is a true or false statement. So you could use binary as an example. So 0 could be off and 1 can be on. An array is a list of variables. And an array also uses an index, which is a variable's position on a list. And last but not least is the float, also called floating point number, and that it may have decimals. It's basically a number which has decimals. And this is an example of this could be 75.00. Even though it can be rounded up as a whole number, you can also use this as a float. And to declare a variable means basically you're creating variables. And we have some rules for variables. One of the rules is only a single type of variable can be used each time. So when we're declaring or making a variable, we can only use one of these types. We can't use an integer and character together. And when we use those together, it would be called a string. And you can't start the variable with digits or numbers. So when we're labeling our variable, for example, if we want to name it year 1970, we can't name it as 1970 and start it with that. We have to name it as year 1970. So start it with a character. And last but not least, for Unit 1, we have the 1.9, and it's basically applying variables. It just talks about user input, which is user instruction that is transformed into code. And then also variable, which is a placeholder to store particular value slash attribute. And a placeholder is basically a variable for a certain value. So now that you've learned all this, try to go quiz yourself. In Project STEM, you can find the Unit 1 review under the section Unit 1. I hope this video helped, and this is basically just a recap of Unit 1 and vocab. We will have a Unit 2 video coming soon, so stay tuned for that. Thank you, bye!